Wait a bit in 1 minute. I'm just setting up the audio issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah. Oh, you can continue now.
Hi, everybody. I'm getting a really bad echo in my ear here. Okay. So just a quick wave. I don't know if everyone can wave, you can hear me, then I know I'm talking to real people. Can we see some hands? Can you hear me? Hey, excellent. There's a bit of a delay, but it's really a real pleasure to be with you at your conference. I'm down in Cape Town, so a long way away from you guys, but it's a real pleasure to be speaking at your conference, and I hope it's going well, and the rest of the program will be equally as fascinating. So I was asked to talk about the African AI ecosystem. It's something I've been working on for the last sort of four and a half years. For anyone that knows me, a little bit about myself. If you've not come across me before, my name is Nick Bradshaw. I've been in the tech industry for 25 years. I married a South African. That's why you can hear a British accent. So I'm not local. I'm not a local South African, but I live here now, and I've been here for 12 years. I originally trained as a chemist and did a PhD in analytical science. And then I worked in technology transfer for the UK government for 5 years. And then I've been in the enterprise software space for 10 years. And then I moved into the startup space in 2006. And I've been involved in multiple tech startups, but I've worked on 3 main startups that I've been involved in personally as a shareholder. With my most recent one being AI Media. So if you want to scan that QR code, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to connect with anyone who's involved in the African AI ecosystem. But my goal is to really help build and showcase what's going on across Africa. Whilst I'm based in South Africa, what we do is it's Pan-African. And I'm mainly focused on connecting up the startup, enterprise, supplier, buyer, community, as well as looking at AI for good in Africa. And we have a relationship with the UNITU on that. So please connect with me, and always I'll add you into our groups, and you'll learn a lot more about what we're doing as well. So essentially, I created AI Media because after I was involved in my last startup company and I was looking at the artificial intelligence landscape, which I'm pretty passionate about, there wasn't really any community that was focusing on sort of business to business trade, buyers and suppliers. There was obviously a big academic community. Obviously, you'll know about the deep learning in Daba, and the academic community is very healthy across the Africa region. But there wasn't really any business community that I could find. So, in the true spirit of entrepreneurship, I created one, and I set out to build that community. So we do industry analysis, we build the community, we publish a quarterly magazine. It's a digital magazine, it's free to read, it's free to subscribe to, and it talks about the African AI ecosystem. And then the annual event that we run is called AI Expo Africa. We've run it for since 2018, and it's now become an annual event. So really what I'm trying to do is connect people to opportunity, connect people to investment, whether that's investment opportunities or supplier, buyer type opportunities, educational opportunities. We share knowledge. We want to showcase the best of African innovation. We want to signpost people to education and support. And then the final thing, it's, we're not shy about saying, we want to generate a prosperous African ecosystem where not only can people trade within the continent, but also be attracting investment to the region, as Africa is now a significant frontier tech market. Just some stats. We have grown over the last 5 editions of the event. We just ran the most recent event in Johannesburg as our return to face-to-face events. So we did 2 years in Cape Town, 2018, 2019, then we did 2020, 2021 online, and then we just finished AI Expo Africa 2022 in Joburg. These are some of the companies that joined. Obviously, there's a much broader African ecosystem. We've identified over 200 partners across the continent, whether that's academia or accelerators, incubators, NGOs, and anyone, including yourselves, people that are trying to build the ecosystem, either country by country or city by city across the African continent. As I mentioned, you can sign up for Synapse magazine. It's free. We've done, I think we're working on our 18th edition now. And also, please do subscribe to us on YouTube. We run AI TV, which is a YouTube channel. It's just dedicated to all things AI in Africa. We do interviews, we showcase companies on there, and also online content. And if you want to scan this QR code, if you've got your phone handy, and this is on the screen, please scan this QR code, and there's a little downloadable PDF with all these links, all this knowledge, and also a link to the free copy of the report, the State of AI in Africa report, which is what I'm going to talk about now. So that's broadly the introduction. Scan that QR code, and you can get all this information and look at it after the event. So the main thing I'm going to talk about is mapping the African AI ecosystem. This is something that I've been wanting to do for some time. We started building up a data set from around 2019 onwards. We've got over 2,200 data points in our own database. But we also looked at LinkedIn, Crunchbase, and the Africa Big Deal data set to build up this new report, which we launched earlier in the year, called the State of AI in Africa report. Again, when you look at these reports that you find online, many of them are missing data, they're fragmented, they may be biased towards a certain country or city, or whoever happens to be funding the report, it tends to be skewed towards them. That's not to say that the reports themselves are not useful, but we wanted to create a vendor funder independent report. We actually funded this ourselves, and we wanted to look at the entire African continent and try and baseline what is going on across the continent. I know you always hear about South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, but what about the other 50 countries across the continent? What is going on in those other countries? Are they growing? Are they adopting these technologies? What is the state of maturity on a country by country basis? So whilst this report does not claim to be it's not a 500-page encyclopedia type document. It's aimed to just give someone who's new to the industry a high-level view, and obviously we hope you find it useful. Just before I kind of get into the report, clearly, there are some significant trends. Currently at the moment, venture capital funding is declining because of sort of global economic pressures. Africa's not immune to that, but a great data set that you can look at is the Africa Big Deal data sets. They're probably the most authoritative kind of repository of data for understanding what's just going on in tech investment in general, not specifically AI, although we did look at some of this data for the AI ecosystem, and I'll talk about that in a minute. If we look across the continent as a whole in terms of the tech sectors, where a lot of this investment is going, fintech is leading the way. So these are kind of industry segments, and things like logistics, energy, healthcare, agri, education, retail. They're big sectors on the continent. But there is this new and emerging sector called deep tech. It's broadly where AI sits, but AI is also a cross-cutting technology. So you could look at it as it's cutting across over 120 different industry segments, but it's also a segment on its own. So it's cross-cutting, and it can be looked at as its own independent segment, and it's certainly a segment that's going to grow over the coming years. So yeah, Maxim Bayern and Max Cavalier from the Africa Big Deal. Again, I make reference to that in the report, and you can find out more about them as well. The other thing which I think is a big opportunity on the continent is investment that could potentially result in many more companies being created in our tech space, which is the funding of university research and the spinning out of companies from universities. If you look at sort of America and Europe and Asia, the industry relationship with universities and investors is much tighter. It's much more integrated. So universities are not necessarily always seen as the place producing people with degrees. They are also places where you can generate new companies, and that these new ideas, this new IP needs funding to obviously liberate that into the marketplace. So I see this as a massive opportunity across the continent. There's some fantastic universities across the African ecosystem, and many of them are solving and researching specific problems specific to the continent, and they need funding. And there are various initiatives looking at that. One of them is the CIRRUS consortium at Wits University in South Africa. So they're trying to create an institutional fund that can then fund university IP across the board. So again, something to consider. And then if we look at some trends specifically at growing AI ecosystems at the country level, it's very interesting to look at other countries as kind of blueprints perhaps for how to integrate an ecosystem at every single level. So government, industry, mid-sized companies, startups, universities, NGOs, etc. And a very good one is the Dutch AI Coalition, the Netherlands AI Coalition. They've created this kind of ecosystem which has regions across the country, and they share information and best practice, within this framework. And again, I think it's an interesting opportunity at the national level. You've got similar things going on with in Tunisia, for example. They have a very similar model there, which again, I think from an African perspective is interesting to consider. But this idea of government and industry and academia, startups and investors sharing knowledge and sharing information, I think it's a really good thing for us to think about. I mean, if you're a data scientist right now, or getting into the machine learning, deep learning space, it's a great time. And this is some information from LinkedIn, looking at skills which are in significant demand. And, whether we look at sort of the Northeast, South and West, cloud computing, artificial intelligence and data-driven decision-making, or data science, perhaps if you want to call it that, are the big skills in demand from companies across the continent. And then if we drill down into South Africa, this is information from LinkedIn from 2019. Fintech dominates the skills kind of acquisition cycle, but artificial intelligence and data science, computer science, it's up there in the top 5. And post-COVID, I mean, obviously this is pre-COVID information. You don't necessarily need to get a job in South Africa if you're sitting in South Africa or Kenya or Tanzania or Lagos or Morocco or wherever you are. You can work anywhere in the world now, and that's a much more accepted paradigm. So there's a very interesting dynamic now with young students, where if you were leaving university, you might have wanted to work in Johannesburg or Nairobi or Accra or wherever it might be. Well, you don't need to leave your city now to go and work in New York or London or Singapore. And it'll be interesting to see how that impacts the ecosystem in the post-COVID world. I think with AI, we have to be careful. A lot of people I talk to in the media and they think it's, a force for bad. that it's going to destroy jobs, it's going to destroy the world in some cases. But AI is not quite there yet. I mean, there are situations where it's only as good as the data that goes into it or that it's trained on. Obviously, we all know about some other kind of traditional things here on the right-hand side of this slide, where it's easy to fool a human or a machine into thinking, which is a dog, which is a blueberry muffin. But equally, if you look at the slide on the left, I'm sure that's not the world's longest cow. But these systems are not 100% accurate necessarily. And that in certain instances, like for example, autonomous vehicles, we're still a long way off from perfecting this technology. But in the main now, I mean, in 2018, people were still kind of having that conversation about the AI winter and what is AI. We've now moved into AI's here. How do we use it how do we use it safely? How do we use it in a way where it's easily explained? If it's not working, do we know why it's not working? So these are some of the issues that we need to deal with. As I mentioned before, an autonomous car, it's quite interesting. The amount of code that's in an autonomous vehicle, is way higher than what you might think in, an advanced military system, and that creates problems for us all that we need to be mindful of. If you create an autonomous vehicle that's going to be trained on data in a very kind of uniform environment, like a highway in America, well, highways in America don't look like highways necessarily in the middle of Accra in rush hour, for example, or some of the systems are very heterogeneous, they're not homogeneous, and therefore can you take an autonomous vehicle from Europe and stick it in an African context? These are some of the challenges that we'd have to kind of face. And then we've got things like Oxford Insights. I make reference to this in the report. They are mapping not only the adoption of AI by governments and national strategies, but they're also looking at things like the readiness and ethical maturity and deployment of these technologies. So again, another useful resource. And the final thing is, we need to think about bringing young people along on the journey. I was lucky enough to be part of the BOTNA UN Youth Conference, which happened in Kigali recently. That young people have a different view on this. They have some interesting ideas on this, and we need to include them on this journey as well. So let's just get into the report quickly. As I say, the link to this report is in the QR code. I'll make reference to it again in a second. So if you go to aiafricareport.gumroad.com, you can get a copy of the report. As I say, it's free to download. Please give us a review, and you just can download it as a PDF and then read it at your leisure. So I'll just give everyone a couple of seconds to make a note of that. If you scan that QR code, it's in that list as well. Okay, so what we wanted to try and do with this mapping exercise is, first of all, I wanted to kind of get a view of the African continent compared to other regions of the world. And in doing that, we tried to look at it on a regional basis. So we looked at North America, Asia, Europe, Middle East, and Latin America, and basically Africa as a whole. And this is for the number of companies declaring that they have a specialism in artificial intelligence. That was the search phrase that we put into LinkedIn to do this baseline. Is, Africa as a whole is sort of up there with Latin America and the Middle East in terms of the number of entities, which is a good kind of comparison at the sort of what you might call the BRICS level. But then if you look at Asia as a whole in Europe and North America, then obviously the numbers are radically different and much larger. So no real surprises, but it was interesting to see that we're on par with the Middle East and Latin America. And then if you drill a little bit deeper on that, UAE and Brazil dominate Middle East and Latin America respectively. And then if you look down into the number one and number two countries, South Africa and Nigeria, they're up there sort of with Israel. And it's obviously interesting there that Israel and the UAE are very small entities in terms of the size of the country, and yet they've got this massive number of companies declaring a specialism in AI. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that the government is spending and investing heavily in seeing these technologies as an enabler. So often what we saw in this research was the size of the country doesn't really matter necessarily. It's whether the government is getting behind it in terms of the percentage of GDP that's being reinvested into research and academia, which then results in more patents, more IP, that then results in more startups, and more startup initiatives, there's more investors, that results in more companies, et cetera, et cetera. And it becomes a virtuous circle where the wealth generated from these high-tech companies results in job creation, results in taxation, that feeds back into the economy. So, the fact that UAE and Israel are so small, you can see that they are seeing this as a strategic technology within their economy. So if we spread all those numbers out, and then now we break it down at the African level, at the continental level, we see the top 4 countries: South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, and Kenya. No real surprise there, obviously. They always tend to be the 4 dominant regions of the continent: North, East, South, and West. But it was interesting to then see the satellite countries and where they fit in terms of the number of companies declaring a specialism in AI. So you've got a cluster around Kenya, you've got a cluster around Nigeria, there's a couple of key countries around South Africa, and then you've got the Arabic speaking north, Morocco, kind of a good number 2 in the North Africa region. But Tunisia, for its size, again, 103 companies, and again the Tunisian government has got behind AI as a key technology for economic growth. So again, I thought this was a very good comparison. And then you've got Mauritius on the far right there as well. Clearly a very small island nation, but putting high tech at the center of its economic growth. So there were some interesting observations. I'm going to just, I could talk about this for about 4 hours, but I've got about another sort of 5-8 minutes to go. So all of this is in the report, but we did identify some key activities and initiatives going on across the continent which are worthy of note. You've got the Nigerian Center of Excellence for Artificial Intelligence and Robotics. You've got ATIA in Tunisia. You've got the Smart Africa Artificial Intelligence Blueprint, which is a blueprint for national governments to create their own strategies. You've got the African Union NEPAD agency, which is creating a Pan-African strategy for AI at the African Union level. And then you've got entities like Data Science Nigeria, which is a country level initiative now gone beyond the Nigerian borders across Africa and outside of the continent, where it's an NGO focused on, it's a not-for-profit organization focused on education and growing education, both online and offline, to people in the Nigerian AI community. So, you've got the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology in Egypt. Again, they put AI as a key enabler, key pillar in their strategy. So there's many more of these, which I do link to in the report. I think there's 36 entities, which I think are worth following up on. And definitely deserve a little bit more analysis if you have the time. Most of them are African based. There are some like the UNITU AI for Good. We've got a relationship with them. Obviously, Africa underrepresented in that community. We're obviously trying to change that. You've got the Oxford Insights data set as well that's worth looking at. And then you've got the OECD AI Observatory. But the rest of those on here are based in Africa, in the African continent. I mean, just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, the report then goes into breaking this down as to things like ownership structure. Most of these companies are privately held. And when we looked at the industry segment, we identified 121 different industry segments where within our data set where AI is having an impact. The greatest ones of most prominence, obviously ICT and computer software. But the other ones that dominate, financial services, consulting, telecoms, marketing and advertising was an interesting one as well that came up a lot. But then you've got things like healthcare, wellness, fitness, education, etc. So it was just interesting to see that AI is impacting many industry segments. It's not constrained to just 4 or 5. We also looked at the size of these companies. The vast majority have, 75% or 76% have 100 staff or less. And then if you look at that category itself, it's almost like 50-50. Most of the companies are small companies. Obviously, they've been recently formed and they're growing. So, it's very startup, SME driven. And then obviously you've got at the other end, you've got the odd, 10,000 plus type company, the Amazons, the Microsofts, the IBMs of this world. Obviously they have a specialism in AI and they're global. So yeah, it was interesting to see that trend. We did an analysis back to 1970 to see when these companies were formed or created or launched. The vast majority have been created in the last 10 years as this technology has gone mainstream. And it'll be interesting to see what the next kind of time period shows. We saw a little bit of a leveling off in the last time period. Maybe that's something to do with COVID. I'm not sure. And then we looked at the investment landscape. South Africa is very good at, so this analysis was done specifically on AI and deep tech startups attracting investment. And it showed that South Africa was number 1, followed by Tunisia. And it's interesting that, there's only 1 or 2 big deals in here that can skew this data. So we actually looked at, I think we looked at 226 AI deep tech investments in Africa. And we found 141 different organizations were funding them. And many of those companies are not in Africa. So if you're looking for funding for your AI startup, you should spend time looking locally, but you should spend time looking globally, because many of these investors are not on the African continent. And I do go into this in a bit more detail in the report. Obviously, the big one is InstaDeep. They landed $100 million at the beginning of this year, the biggest AI investment in the continent today, and actually still one of the top 10 investments across all sectors for this year. So congratulations to the team there. There is this new wave of, they call them soonicorns. They're not quite unicorns, but they might become unicorns, so they call them soonicorns. Yeah, and there's plenty of these companies across the Africa region, not just focused on AI. This is just a general slide. And then we did some analysis as to the most common cities that these companies are based in, and then who's most active globally and locally in the trade space. So again, that was some useful information worthy of looking at. So just to summarize, we looked at over 2,400 companies that had a specialism in AI on the African continent. 4 countries dominate. This deep tech sector has attracted $500 million in investment, and I think that's only going to grow over time. Most of the companies are small, and most of them are privately held. We found that 40% were founded in the last 5 years, and the growth curve is strong. So, this is a growing sector, which is good. And we identified it's impacting 120 different market segments. So I'm not sure if I've got any time for questions, but that's just to wrap it up and just to say thank you for your time, and click on those links and yeah, dive into the report in a bit more detail. I hope you found that useful.
Okay, thank you so much.
A bit of echo.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Nick. I think we should see if we have any question from the audience, and then we'll end up this. But I have one thing. This is from my side. You shared about the state of the like the state of AI in Africa in different perspectives, from the industry perspective to the AI talent gap in the continent. But personally, I would like also to know, like, from that report, because it gives the image of how AI in Africa is. So can you share some few insights on the research and political perspectives in terms of, based on the on that report? And then we'll have some few questions from the audience, and then we'll be ending the session.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I think my observation was really bad echo. Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Yeah, cool. Yeah, so yeah, my observation was that the countries that seem to be embracing these technologies, and I don't necessarily put AI as the only technology. I mean, there's other things happening with new technologies, data science, IoT. But if we call it fourth industrial revolution technologies as a whole, where you see the national governments getting behind it, and then that joined up. So you got national government tops down, and then you've got kind of investors and startups, industry bottom up. If you can get that happening in your country, then I think that is where these technologies in the ecosystem will grow much faster. So I think from a political perspective, industry and investors and startups pushing up, and then government pushing down. If you can integrate that through a national strategy or national policy, then I think the ecosystem will grow much faster. Where you see a disconnect in that is where the countries are falling behind. Maybe they've got other challenges, infrastructure, maybe education, maybe a bigger priority naturally. But if you look at the data science Nigeria model, that's a not-for-profit education model, which is actually just growing and growing and growing. So some of the learnings and the teachings that you can gather in this community are not going to come necessarily from the traditional education system and going to school or university. They're going to come from online learning separate from that. So yeah, I think it's a multidisciplinary strategy that you need, and national governments need to get behind it. You said there was a question.
Thank you so much. So let's see if we have any question from the audience, and then we end up.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's our time.
No questions? You're letting me off. Yeah, there's a gentleman put his hand up there on the left.
Thanks for the nice presentation. Kind of analysis to see how you map the any kind of infrastructure mapping in Africa, infrastructure that very critical and necessary to support
Could the moderator just repeat the question, because I couldn't quite hear that. Okay. Yeah. What was the question?
So the question is, what can you say about the mapping of infrastructures in Africa? Like, as we know, AI solutions need a lot of infrastructure things which are capable of running the solutions. So what can you say about it? Yeah.
Okay. Well, again, I think it's the countries where they're putting this as a priority are the countries where you're seeing companies like AWS, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, they're opening data centers or connecting up I think the recent one down in South Africa was the subsea cable from Facebook. So where those infrastructures are being set up and invested in is where obviously you're getting a bigger tech ecosystem growing around them. Yeah, we didn't map that in the report. I think that would be a useful thing to add in for next time. But I think the growth of data centers and subsea connectivity and infrastructure, and particularly mobile, is where you'll see a greater concentration of these companies. I'd be really interested to see how the Lagos ecosystem emerges in the next 5 years. Obviously, you've got the big smart city initiative in Egypt. They're building a brand new city, sort of like Dubai, but in the desert. So, some of the national governments are making these big investments and building an entirely new ecosystem out of nothing, like they did in Dubai in the late 90s. And yeah, I mean, there's a smart city to the east of in Senegal, east of Dakar. It's even going to have its own cryptocurrency. So yeah, there's some big ideas and some big thinking now emerging, which I think can only be a good thing as long as the investment is there to sustain them and see the projects through to the end. Okay, I think probably have we overrun there, guys? So are we done? Are we finished?
Yeah, so I got two other questions here.
Okay.
So one is, in advance of AI in Africa, what do you think about the availability of data set that will push the development of AI in Africa, like the issue of data? What are the thoughts on that area? And the
and you said
second
you
one,
said there was
what advice do you have for startup to reach the InstaDeep? I think the InstaDeep is the company based in Tunisia, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So what do you advise if people want to reach companies like InstaDeep?
Would you say reach or build?
Those are two questions.
Okay, well, I think the thing around. Okay, so I think the thing around data, a lot of people say, obviously a lot of these new technologies are based on data. It's really difficult to answer that question in a way, because really a lot of this data is locked up in big companies like mobile phone companies, retailers, insurers, bankers, and then you've then got the government side of it. So, you data to do with people's identity, passports, social security, taxation, those kinds of things. So it's all good and well having data, and data sitting somewhere in a data center or on a server. But to exploit that data and to use it usefully, you've got to have a strategy. If you want to change, you need a strategy that incorporates data as just one part of it. If you use an organizational change model, successful change only happens if you have tops-down leadership and a clear vision about what you want to achieve, and then you have an education program for the people that you need to bring along for change, the technology needed to bring people along on that change, and then a budget to support it. So it's great if you've got data, and it doesn't really matter if you have no data. In the absence of all those other things, you're never going to do anything with data. So I think it's a kind of a strange starting point to begin the discussion on improving society or improving a company or improving a government. if you don't have those other things, it doesn't matter whether you've got 10 billion data points or 0 data points, you're never going to make any useful use of it if you don't have strategy, budget, a change program, a vision, a communication strategy, a training program, etc., whether you're government or industry. So if you don't have those things, it doesn't matter whether you have the shiniest brand new data center crammed full of data, it'll just sit there and it'll never get used because you don't have all the other elements of the change program. And so I just look at it as an organizational change function, whether you're in government or industry. If you don't have those components, you won't be able to utilize or jump on to the 4th industrial revolution. In terms of advice for startups, first of all, setting up a startup, whether you're in Africa or not in Africa, is very, very difficult. It's tremendously difficult to develop a startup, whether you're bootstrapping it or you've got investment. The markets in Africa are very traditionally small. If you look at them on a country by country basis, if you're a B2B player, if you're selling to a bank or whatever, then you're in a small market versus Europe or America or Asia. And it's difficult to find funding. The InstaDeep, don't forget, InstaDeep was, I think they were founded in 2016. So they've been on a 6-year journey at least to get to that point where they've got funding, and they've remained very focused. So my advice is really focus on a real problem, focus on it, and don't get distracted. And there's a big difference between a products company and a services company. And a lot of startups in this particular sector are set out to solve data science or AI challenges in companies. That's a services company. If you've got a product, then that's a completely different thing altogether. If you're a services company, you won't find funding. It'll be very unusual for you to find funding if you're just solving things with a bag of tools and a lot of data scientists. If you've got a product that is AI driven or uses AI as a component, then that's something much more understandable, and investors will focus on the problem, and that is likely to gain more funding. So focus, understand your market, and don't try and be clever with a whole bunch of tools going around and solving difficult AI problems. That's not a model that's going to succeed. So hopefully that's useful.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Nick. We had a bit of delay.
And don't try and yeah, bit of a delay there.
Thank you so much for joining us. And
difficult AI problems.
yeah, so
that's not a model that's going to succeed.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, bit of a delay there.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nick, for joining us, and we hope we'll be having you in other coming events, and we appreciate your time, and we'll be glad to learn a lot again from you and to share with us the findings of which is being done by AI Expo Africa in creating those reports about the state of AI in Africa. So we'll highly appreciate that, and I think we give a chance to audience to say bye, and then we'll be ending this session. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody.